Harry MacDougald from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm going to talk about how the endangerment finding relates to ongoing climate litigation. In order to set the table, recall President Trump comes into office with an energy dominance agenda, and he takes strong and decisive action to revoke the social cost of carbon estimates, disband the office that created them, roll back regulations wherever possible, including the Clean Power Plan and the new source review rule, and withdraw from the Paris Accords, which I rank as his second greatest achievement after getting liberals to hate Russia. But the environmental empire did not sit still. They have launched a litigation war on all fronts. They are filing an average of 2 cases per week during the Trump administration. I'm going to take you through the point of entry screens from a very good database maintained by the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law and Arnold and Porter. And the point of doing this is to give you an overview of the scope and breadth of the types of cases that are being filed. These are the federal statutory claims. The primary statutes are going to be the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act, and the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. These are the constitutional and state law claims, of which there are many. The numbers that are shown under each category are for all of the cases in the database, which goes back a good bit longer than 2 years. And we have common law, public trust, securities and financial regulation, that's the growth area, trade agreements, and here we have cases on adaptation and protesters and scientists. So all manner of claims are being brought. The targets of climate litigation are basically every single point of regulatory contact for the fossil fuel industry, of which there are many. Extraction, exploration, transportation, processing, consumption. The legal tools used against the fossil fuel industry are all the statutes and legal theories that you just saw. They're fighting at the administrative level, they're fighting in court. And if they had Winston Churchill, they'd be fighting on the beaches. They're moving into securities litigation and municipal bond ratings. The types of cases that have been filed, and this is just in 2017 and 2018, 18 under the Clean Air Act, 34 under NEPA, and those are mainly environmental impact statement cases, 21 of them against the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more, 15 under endangered species, 7 nuisance cases, of which the California and New York cases are one, 7 public trust cases, of which the Kitty case is one. They're being filed against the fossil fuel industry at every step of their business. They're being filed against electric utilities to the extent they use fossil fuels to generate power, against the transportation sector, really anything they can get their hands on. Their objective, of course, is to save the world. It's a secular millenarian crusade, but that's another presentation for another day. The Sierra Club has launched a campaign they call 100% Clean and Renewable Energy. So if you are particularly drawn to empty-headed virtue signaling, you can pledge yourself or your company or your community to be a 100% clean and renewable operation. And if you do that, all the people that hate your guts and want to see your industry completely destroyed will say nice things about you for a day or two. They're following something called the La Jolla Playbook, which is to sue the fossil fuel companies until they beg for mercy, beg for regulation, and beg for carbon taxes. And the big oil companies are now in favor of carbon taxes. So if you're in the oil business or the fossil fuel business, I have something I'd like you to think about. Chesapeake Energy gave the Sierra Club $26 million to go attack coal and as protection money. But the Sierra Club did not stay bought. They're now seeking 100% renewables, and they're attacking natural gas at every opportunity. So here's the lesson. If your business strategy is for the alligator to eat you last, you don't have much of a strategy. The Sierra Club is part of a frequent filer program. They have 23 cases since the Trump administration. The Center for Biological Diversity has 17. The NRDC has 10. I thought it would be amusing or interesting to compare the resources that they bring to this litigation compared to that of the United States government, particularly the Department of Justice, Energy, and Natural Resources Division. The Sierra Club and the NRDC's annual revenues in 2017 combined were $270 million. The 2018 budget for the DOJ Energy and Natural Resources Division was $109 million. The NRDC and the Sierra Club had $413 million in the bank at the end of 2017. So what's going on with these cases? The nuisance cases, you've already heard some about. They've been dismissed in San Francisco and New York. To quote Pyrrhus, the origin of Pyrrhic victories, a few more victories such as this and we will be lost. The oil companies admitted causation in San Francisco. At the climate tutorial, the first words out of their lawyer's mouth after he said his name were to adopt the IPCC conclusions, hook, line, and sinker. I believe they will rue the day that they did that. The regulatory cases are moving more slowly, but most of the appeals are not going well for the Trump administration. And the important point about the regulatory cases is that because of the endangerment finding, the government is constrained to admit that greenhouse gases cause global warming. That requires regulation under the Clean Air Act. It requires the rest of the government to admit causation in all of these climate cases. And because of that, the main issue in these cases is not whether to regulate, it's how much to regulate. And that is a very significant point. So how does this play out in practice? A great example is a case called Sierra Club versus FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, relating to the Sabin Trail Pipeline project. And it illustrates the regulatory creep of the endangerment finding in the global warming agenda. Sierra Club challenged the environmental impact statement for this project for failure to consider upstream and downstream greenhouse gas emissions and their effect on climate change. FERC had admitted in their environmental impact statement that greenhouse gases cause climate change, and they really had to do that because of the endangerment finding. So that Sierra Club challenged, it went to the DC Circuit, and the DC Circuit ruled in favor of the Sierra Club and told FERC they had to consider upstream and downstream emissions. And the court said, you've admitted causation, you have to consider it. So that's extremely significant for future pipeline approvals. FERC did not seek certiorari in the Supreme Court of the United States, which tells you they thought they would have lost if they had. So after that decision, the matter goes back to FERC, and they said to the DC Circuit, basically, you're not the boss of me. They issued a supplemental environmental impact statement in which they said, yeah, we know there's going to be downstream emissions, and we know all about all this global warming stuff, but we still can't tell if it's significant, so we're approving the project. And they're not going to consider the social cost of carbon either, which is pretty bold considering the content of the DC Circuit's decision. But FERC was just getting started. The commission voted 3-2 along partisan lines that they were not required and would not consider upstream and downstream emissions in pipeline approvals. You might say they told the DC Circuit to FERC off. As you can well imagine, when the environmental groups heard that, they said, what the FERC are you talking about? I don't think this is going to end well for FERC, but we'll find out eventually. Not long after that decision, they voted, a Republican member resigned, leaving a 2-2 deadlock on the question of pipeline approvals. If the Democrats filibuster the next appointee, it would preserve the deadlock. If you had a Democrat majority of climate hawks on FERC, they could block expansion of the U.S. pipeline network. A trade group has estimated that the U.S. needs 26,000 miles of new natural gas pipeline by 2035. Crude pipelines are also needed. This idea of considering upstream and downstream emissions has spread to mineral leasing cases. There are recent decisions on mineral leases where they've sent it back for that. All of the growth in the fossil fuel industry in the United States is threatened by the regulatory requirement to factor that in and FERC being able to strangle it with a Democrat majority, and the root cause of all of that is the endangerment finding. Revised clean power plans and new source review rules have been submitted to OMB by the EPA, and they may come out any day. The rumor is, or reporting is, the Clean Power Plan will call for inside the fence regulation. And if it does, that will be an implicit ratification of the endangerment finding. And that will be a very, very important development. Going forward, the only debate in the regulatory cases will be how much to regulate, not whether to regulate. And honestly, when saving the planet is on the line, how could there be too much regulation? The acting head of the EPA, Mr. Wheeler, has said that the endangerment finding is a closed issue and that it's settled law, which is complete nonsense because it's a finding, not a judicial decision. If the endangerment finding is left in place, it is a direct threat to the energy dominance agenda by regulatory strangulation. Energy dominance is integral to the President's strategies for economic growth, economic security, energy security, national security, and foreign policy. It is through energy dominance that the President hopes to and has been successful in influencing world economy and geopolitics in our favor. The endangerment finding subjects that to a threat of regulatory strangulation. It is a clear and present danger to cheap electricity and grid resilience. The next Democrat administration, and there will be one, will turn the screws. And when that doesn't work, because it will never work, they'll turn the screws even harder. So leaving the endangerment finding in place exposes the entire agenda to all of these risks. CO2 emissions are ubiquitous to modern civilization. And once you accept the premise that they're subject to regulation, there is no place to stop. It is a universal, evergreen regulatory rationale that is effectively codified in the endangerment finding. There will be no end of pushing for more and more regulation. The President's agenda is threatened by the continued existence of the endangerment finding. It is not at all clear that the President himself understands that, nor is it clear that his administration understands that. If they ratify the endangerment finding with inside the fence regulation on the Clean Power Plan, which they absolutely should not do, then we're going to be stuck with the endangerment finding until the ice sheets advance on Chicago. At this stage of the game, only Donald Trump can fix.